Right now, we are witnessing unprecedented upheaval across the world. Protests and riots sparked by the barbaric murder of George Floyd have created an urgent and necessary dialogue around race, oppression, privilege, and power. I'm not an expert, nor do I see myself qualified to necessarily comment on the myriad political touchpoints. However, I do know right from wrong. And what's been done for centuries to our Black community is unforgivable. We must be better. We must do better. Diversity isn't a political or corporate buzzword. It's the lifeblood of the human race. We are better for our differences, and each human variation should be celebrated, supported, admired, and tolerated, even if we don't understand one another, because that's not the point. It doesn't matter if I get you or you get me. What matters is we support and fight for each other's right to be different and confusing to people who are, quote, not like us. This, to me, is ultimate freedom. All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. So based on the opening monologue, you see that we're going to dive into a subject that is probably a little tough for most of us to get into. It's tough to hear about. It's tough to think about. However, in light of recent events, it is on all of our minds. It's on all of our conscious. It's imprinted on our soul at this point because we've seen just the insanity that is spreading across the United States. And when I say insanity, what I mean is that, mostly the police response, the government response has been overwhelmingly terrible, probably criminal. I think what's very sad is that this broke out as a debate around police brutality and the murder of George Floyd. And over the last few weeks, in large part, the police departments across the United States have proven without a shadow of a doubt, the brutality, right? So yes, there were looters out there. Yes, there were violent looters out there. There were criminals out there breaking into businesses and people's homes and people's workplaces and so on and so forth. Yes, and all of that is criminal in nature, and I'm not excusing that behavior. There were, however, a lot of peaceful protesters who were beaten, who were pushed, who were injured, who were tear gassed in front of the White House so our racist president could walk across the street and take a freaking picture. So all of these topics are on our mind. Now, I am not going to get into, I should say I'm not deeply going to get into the politics of this. I'm not qualified to do so. I'm not a politician. I'm not a political scientist. I'm not a historian, nothing like that. The angle I want to approach this topic is a personal angle. And I want to share my thoughts on not just this subject, but how I have evolved as a person over the course of my life. And the reason I want to share this is because, number one, it's unique. It's a unique viewpoint because it's my own, right? All of our viewpoints are 100% unique because nobody's lived our life. And I do feel that around this specific issue, I have made a transformation in the way that I feel, in the way that I believe, in the way that I act. And I think that's really important because right now we're focused on the big problems, right? We're talking about laws getting passed. We're talking about defunding police departments. We're talking about getting rid of our president, electing a new president, okay? While all of those things are important and vital work, it's going to be less effective if we don't change person by person. If we don't change our heart, if we don't change our mind, and if we don't change our actions as people, as individuals, we will never see long-term change because then we will always be at the whim of some freaking politician whose incentives are not aligned with our own. So to get into that, to attack this subject, I want to start in my childhood. Now, I was raised in a city called Fresno, California. If any of you know it, then you know Fresno. It is a very conservative town in general, especially when I was growing up in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. Now, Central California kind of runs from Bakersfield to the south all the way through Sacramento, California. And that area of California is referred to as Central California. And this area is incredibly conservative. It is known for its agriculture. It is referred to as the breadbasket of the United States because so much of the food production of the United States comes out of this very relatively small area when you think about how many people it feeds across the United States. So California now, in general, is very liberal. It is much more progressive. It votes stunningly Democratic every single time. So if you are a Democratic presidential candidate, from the Democratic Party, you are guaranteed that the electoral votes from California are going to go your way. I can't think of a Republican in recent memory who has pulled California. Perhaps Reagan won California once. I don't know, or it was close. I don't remember. But it is almost always going to vote for the Democratic candidate. Now, in Central California, where I was raised, it is the exact opposite. It is very Republican. It is very conservative. So while racism and problems of diversity are not necessarily a political party issue, what I mean by this is that you can still be a racist and be a Democrat, right? And you can also be a racist and be a Republican. However, what I have seen and what I have noticed is most policies, rhetoric, actions, proposed policies, proposed ways forward that could be considered racist seem to be coming most often from the Republican Party, from conservatives, okay? That's a general statement. Please, if you're listening, I'm not calling all Republicans racist. I'm not calling all conservatives racist. I'm not calling all Christians racist. So just don't go there. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that in general, what I have seen personally as one human, as one man, what I have read and what I have seen, it seems like to me that most of these types of things are coming from this area of the political spectrum. I could be wrong. So knowing that, let's move forward. So because Fresno is mostly Republican, mostly conservative, I was raised a very specific way. Now, I can't say that my parents raised me to be overtly racist. Of course not. They are good people, kind people, smart people, educated people. However, we were not raised with much diversity in our house. We were raised with a way of thought and a way of seeing the world that now, with I think more modern definitions of racist and racism, that we were raised with racist thoughts. Now, I don't remember any sort of kind of racial dialogue in the house that was made in anger or that was made in a violent sense. It was mostly to do with humor or to do with kind of the eye rolling when someone who's different than you is having a problem and they're trying to get change and you are stuck in that old mindset, in that old social construct, and you just kind of roll your eyes, right? Like, oh yeah, there they go again. Oh yeah, wanting more rights. Oh yeah, gosh, it's always something. It seemed like my family was more in that camp, to where it was more just ignoring the problem than being overtly racist, meaning directly commentating or directly acting. Now, we know with the modern definition of racism, with a more enlightened definition, and just quite honestly, just talking about it more has brought to my awareness that, no, that's racist. Ignoring these things is racist, because there are large groups of people who don't have the same access to most everything that you do, right? And again, I'm a white, upper middle class man born in the United States, which is the definition of privilege. I know I will never understand that. In fact, I'm not probably qualified to even talk about this stuff. In fact, some of you are probably thinking, dude, shut up. You've got nothing to complain about. You have nothing to even add on this subject. And while I agree that I don't have anything to complain about, I disagree that I don't have anything to add on this, because I have made a shift. I have made a change. How I was raised does not equal my destiny. That's what I want to share on today's show is that as that kid raised in a hyper-conservative family who uh, had racist points of view, who raised me to think about races as absolutely different, okay? And seeing that different not necessarily as positive, but as less than, right? That shaped me as a very young man. Now, some things helped me break out of that. Okay. One of them was leaving my hometown of Fresno, getting away from friends and family who were probably still stuck maybe in that mindset. That was one thing. But I think the most important thing that happened to me early on was that I started traveling. Now, the name of the podcast, Nomadic Thrive, I explained this in the last two shows. I'm expanding that definition to also encompass nomadic mindsets, right? To where we're not married to these old constructs of the way we were raised. We constantly challenge ourselves. We educate ourselves. We put our ideas to the test to see if they're actually true. Are they true for us, or is it just dogma that I'm repeating from my church or my family or my politician of choice, right? That's what I mean by nomadic thrive. It is, yes, it's getting up and physically moving, seeing a new city, living abroad, taking a new job across the country, whatever that might mean. But it's also about broadening your mind, educating yourself around these different issues. And that's something that I began in earnest in the the middle 90s. Okay. So I had a girlfriend at the time, and she invited me to go and visit her father, who was working in Malaysia. Now, he was a chemical engineer, I think, and he was setting up these huge, chemical plants across the world. And she was raised as an expat kid, even though they were American. She was raised all over the place. I mean, many countries. I don't even remember all of them. She had a really extraordinary lifestyle that appealed to me. It was very exotic. It was very interesting as a kid who basically never traveled. Like, I never went anywhere as a kid. We would go to Disneyland. We would go to Tahoe. We would go to like Monterey at the coast. But for the most part, we never left California. I think we went to Hawaii. Oh, no, I know we went to Hawaii once. That was it. Maybe Nevada. I mean, that's it. We never even went to Arizona, which is right next to California. So anyhow, I didn't travel much. So when I, met this wonderful young woman who introduced me to international travel, it expanded my mind. And that first trip, we went to Singapore, Malaysia, then took a van and drove up through Malaysia all the way into Thailand, ended up at the Thai beaches, out through Bangkok. So that was the first trip. And I think it was 3 or 4 weeks. It was a very long trip. And it completely rocked my world, completely changed my mind, set around cultures, around differences in people. Some of it was good. Some of it was not good, to be honest. Like, I went through culture shock. It was not comfortable for me. I had a hard time. The last 5 or 6 days, I remember basically just kind of staying in the hotel room. I was sick. I wasn't feeling well. I had a flu or something going on, but I just had enough. It was just too different, too much. And I just needed to power down so I didn't blow a circuit in my brain. But by the time I got back within a couple of weeks, I missed it. I missed that difference. I missed that adventure. I missed the diversity. I missed the cultural dichotomies between my mindset and their mindset, right? And that sparked something in me that I just could no longer deny. And ever since that first trip, I've been trying to figure out, how do I get that permanently into my life? So starting then, in 1995, I would take a trip when I could afford it. Now, back then, I was a struggling student. I was working full-time and part-time, kind of depending on the year. And I was in my, early to mid-20s. It would take me a year or two to save money to take a trip. But then, boom, I'd be on a plane and it was back to Southeast Asia. At the time, it was the most affordable place to travel, where I could get that exotic experience and not break the bank. So I went to Asia quite a bit throughout the 90s. But each time I went, I found these mental constructs that I'd been raised under to start slipping away. And a really interesting distinction, and I mentioned this in the prologue that I read, that I had written earlier in the week, that I read to open this show, is that it's not about, for me over time, it's not about understanding each other. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong in this debate, is that they think that to not be a racist means you have to understand someone from a different race or someone from a different culture. And I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily the goal. I think if you can, great. Like if you can get to a place of full understanding, I think that's awesome. I think that's amazing. I don't think it's necessarily always possible, though. I am never going to understand what it means to be a black man in the United States. I guess I can understand the concept of it, but I can never understand it viscerally. I can never understand it in the marrow of my bones, right? In the basement of my soul. I'll never understand it from that point of view. So I don't think that's necessarily the goal. What I think the goal should be, and where I've gotten to in my life, is that I don't need to understand you. That's not the point. I'm still going to fight for your right to be different. And I think that that's where we can really transcend a lot of this racism and the diversity issues that we have in the United States, is that it's not necessarily about understanding. What it's about is not understanding, but still fighting and supporting your right to be different. Okay? That is what being, like, I guess, an anti-racist might be like, at least the way that it makes sense in my mind. I could be off on the definitions, guys. Again, don't hold me to this. This is just the way I feel about it. And I want to share it because to me, it's unlocked this understanding deeper in my mind. So that first trip helped me take that first step. And it was because of the people I met. It was because of the diverse culture that I had been dropped into. And now I was an outsider for the first time in my life. And I had to see how other people went about making decisions, going about their day, making money, how they created happiness and fulfillment in their own life. I got to witness this firsthand as a young man. And what I saw was absolute, deeply different things. The people that I met in Malaysia and Thailand didn't do things the way that I would do them, right? But at their core, what I noticed is they still all wanted the same things that I wanted: love, belonging, fulfillment, fun, security, financial freedom, time with their family. They wanted a life where their kids had more than what they had growing up. None of that was different. And that really, I guess, shocked me, because I was raised in this very conservative, very traditional, in quotes, because every traditions are different, but traditional in the American sense, right? I was raised in a way of thinking that if someone was different, then what they wanted out of life was also different, right? They were seen as either an enemy or lesser than. And what I started to see through my travels in the 90s as a young man is that even though the day-to-day details were different, the religion was different, the skin color was different, of course, but what we wanted as a core human wasn't different. And that really shocked me as a young man, because I wasn't raised to believe that that would necessarily be the case. So now let's flash forward a few years, okay? So now we're in the mid to late 90s, let's say, and I'm working at a company, and I have a friend there who explained racism to me better than any textbook has ever explained it to me. So a friend of mine, Andre, if you're out there listening, I miss you, man. You made a huge impact on my life, so I hope you're doing well. And Andre was older than me, probably, 10 years or so, 10 or 15 years older than me. And we both worked at a company together. And after work one night, he and I went to go get a beer. Now, Andre is a black man and had this philosopher side to him that always really resonated with me. So, he worked mostly nights, so sometimes I wouldn't see him. And we just happened to both be closing one night, so we went out and grabbed a drink. And it was just he and I, and he would always blow my mind on just his point of view on certain things, not necessarily about race necessarily, but it was always usually political in nature. And I just always found his viewpoint very refreshing, even if I didn't agree with it. But one night we go to a bar and we're sitting there, and it's just he and I. We're bellied up to the bar, and we're 3-4 beers into the evening, so we're feeling pretty good, getting kind of loose. And the subject of race came up. Now, again, here's a black man at that time in his late 30s, and there is a white man in his late 20s. Now, here's the crazy thing. I was technically his boss. So at the time, I was a manager and he was a salesperson. So he has 10 years more experience in the industry than I do, but I was his boss for some crazy, stupid reason, right? So anyhow, but we were friends. There wasn't really, that typical boss-employee relationship. So we were having drinks and we started talking about racism. And I was pushing back a little bit because I was like, look, man, like I just don't see it. I don't see the racism. And guys, keep in mind, this is mid-90s, okay? Mid to late 90s. And I was, coming from a very privileged point of view, as I've already explained. But I didn't necessarily see it. And I was pointing to things that had gotten better, right? And I named a couple of things. I don't remember what I named, but either some political changes or something that I was quoting. And he stopped me and he's like, look, man, I'm going to explain racism to you in the most simple way to prove to you that it still exists and it's still terrible. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, I'm an open-minded guy, like I am, right? So the reason I liked hanging out with Andre is because he would push me to see things differently. So I was always ready to change my mind. So that's, I think, one of the good qualities about me that, I don't know, somehow came into my toolkit as a person, is that even when I've had a rigid belief about something, I've actually always allowed a space for that belief to be changed. So this was one of those cases. And he said to me, and to me, this is still one of the most powerful things that has ever been said to me. He looked at me and he said, I'm going to ask you a question and you need to be honest. And I was like, okay, I'm going to prove racism to you. I'm going to prove it still exists and you're going to feel it in your heart right now from what I'm going to say. And I was like, oh, wow, like this is okay. I'm interested now. This is really big. And he looked at me and he goes, if you had a choice, would you choose to be a black man? And the moment he asked me that question, the facade of my mindset crumbled. And the minute that question escaped his lips, I knew that I was 100% wrong around this question of racism. And it breaks my heart to share this with you. But my answer back to him was, no, I would not choose to be a black man. And he looked at me with, a wry smile, took a sip of his beer, and he said, now, why not, Michael? And that feeling in my heart and in the pit of my stomach as I fought to find reasons why or how to explain it away. And I looked at him and I simply said, you know why. You know why I wouldn't. And in that moment, that simple question from one of my dear friends, two guys over a drink, completely explained racism to me. And we can hide behind these rules and these bar graphs that show more freedoms given to people, blah, 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 right? We can hide behind all of that. But the reason I, in that moment, wouldn't have chosen to be a black man when he asked me that question is because I know how hard it would be. I know that if I made that choice, my life would get worse as a middle-class white male in the United States, okay? It had nothing to do with, the differences in the way I looked or different, cultural practices or anything like that. Like, I didn't even think that. My first initial thought was my life would be harder if I made this decision. If I could magically turn into a black man tonight sitting here at this bar with my friend, my life would immediately get harder, okay? That broke my heart. But his simple question released me. It freed my mind in a lot of ways to where I could no longer deny the concept of racism, okay? And, hopefully Andre writes a book someday because the man has had an amazing life and he is so rich with wisdom. But I will be forever grateful to him for pushing that conversation that night and having the courage to look me in the eye and ask me that question. Because at that point, there was no hiding. There was no hiding anymore, right? I admitted the fact that racism was still a huge issue because I was scared of it. I was scared to feel it. I was scared to put myself into that world as a white man. And because of that, that shift in mindset then propelled me even further. So now let's move forward a little bit even further. So now I've been traveling for a while. I've had this mind-blowing experience with my friend Andre, but I'm still a very young man. I'm still in my 30s at this point. And then I got an opportunity to move abroad. And I took a job with a company that was based in San Diego, but had a facility in Vietnam that I was hired to go manage. And I picked up and I moved to Vietnam. My wife and Sophia, our oldest daughter, joined about 4 months later because Sophia was only 6 months old at the time. Actually, she was only 2 months old when I left. And then she was 6 months old when she moved to Vietnam. But that just happened to be crazy timing. I got this job offer right after she was born. So it was just a crazy time in our life. And I had the pleasure of living in Vietnam for a little over a year, but then traveling back and forth to Vietnam a lot over the next 2 to 3 years during that period of life. And once again, I got an opportunity to be deeply immersed in living with a different culture. Now, what's really interesting about this experience for me is that I was living in Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City, and this is where the Americans were based during the Vietnam War, or what's called the American War in Vietnam. So this city, Ho Chi Minh City, was the base for the American forces during the war. So it was such a really interesting mix of influences that was going on. Also, Vietnam had a French influence from before the war. So I think the French were there for, 90 or 100 years or something. The French had a large influence on Vietnam. So Ho Chi Minh City, if you've not been, is a really cool mix of East and West. And what I found living there is that while certain American ideals were embraced, there was also this very traditional side. And something that travel cannot do if you take a vacation versus if you live in a city is that you don't get to see the small details around just day-to-day life. So sure, when you travel, you're taking a 2-week vacation, you get a lot of postcards, snapshots, you get to see some of the touristy things, you get to see some of the traditions, and I'm using air quotes, you can't see it, but some of the traditions that, for the most part, what I have found in my travels is that a lot of the traditional things you see are put on as a show for tourists. When you live in a foreign country, however, a lot of that stuff falls away. You don't go to the tourist places anymore. You go to your neighborhood. You go to places that everybody goes to, and you see real life. You see real culture. You see real diversity, and you start measuring that then against your experience and your life and your upbringing. So living in Vietnam for over a year really expanded my worldview around life, around love, and around family. And what I mean by this is that, I got to see my neighbors and how they interacted with their family, with their loved ones, and with their children. And what I loved was that it's not any different than the way I felt about my kids and my wife and my family, right? It was just no different, guys. Like, they would laugh, they would cry, they would, have fun, have barbecues. Everybody doted on the baby. It's no different. It's absolutely no different. And I know this sounds probably, self-evident, but guys, growing up in a hyper-conservative town, and especially in the media news, right now, especially like thinking about China, right? I live in Shanghai, China right now. And so much of the news coming out of the United States is just negative China, negative, negative, negative. They're enemies, they're this, they're that, And one of the comments that I get over and over on my Instagram is from people in the United States saying, wow, China looks actually really nice. Look at all the family values. Look at everybody at the park together. Look at everybody loving on their kids and, riding bikes together and stuff like that. And I think that, the media just shows, the red flag. They show the president of China. They show the tanks and the missiles, and, they show all the negative things, but they don't show day-to-day China, which is very, very similar to day-to-day United States. Well, living in Vietnam back in 2006 and 7 that was my first kind of view of this to where, wow, okay, yes, I've traveled before. I've been through a lot of Southeast Asia, but I've always done it as a tourist. Now I'm doing it as an expat. I'm actually living here. I'm paying my bills here. I've got a landlord here. I've got, grocery stores that are my grocery store that I go to every week, right? I had habits. I had restaurants that would know me by name and they would know where I'd like to sit over time. And all of these things became life. And because it became my life, it challenged my conservative view of right, wrong, race, and diversity. And what I mean by that is, for the first time in my life, I saw myself as a global citizen. I saw myself as kind of above race in a sense. Now, I know that's not a popular view, and I don't necessarily mean it in the way that maybe some of you might take that. But what I mean is that I was just a human existing in a place. I didn't see myself necessarily as an American in Vietnam in big, bold letters, okay? And excuse me, and what it taught me is that I can live anywhere, right? I'm a human. I can live anywhere. Our human values aren't that different. Our political values might be different. Our religious values might be different. But human values, way down at the animal level, at the mammalian level of being human, really is not that different. And Vietnam taught me that. Now, because of that experience, I continued to expand my mindset. I continued to read, right? And when I joined the current company that I work for now, which I've been with almost 10 years, I joined this company for many reasons, but one of the reasons is because I knew they had an international presence that was expanding. And I knew I would have to work for it. I knew I would have to prove myself, which I did. But the minute I got a chance to then jump overseas again, I did, and I took it. So that's why I've been in China now for almost 5 years, is because that was part of my master plan, to always continually put myself in these positions for personal, mental, spiritual evolution, okay? And I don't think anything confronts these things more than a nomadic life. That is my whole thesis on life. That is my whole thesis for this channel. And this is my whole thesis on how we can destroy racism and any sort of these like diversity issues. You got to get out there, people. You got to get out there. You got to get a freaking passport, and you got to stop going to just Mexico or Canada if you're an American. Get out there, okay? See some things, experience some things. If you can take a job overseas, do it, do it, do it, even if it's only for a year, okay? Most Americans do not travel. Most Americans, if they do travel, go to Mexico, Hawaii, or Canada, okay? I think it's something like only 30% of Americans have passports. And then it's something like 60 to 70% of the people that do have passports only use it to go to Canada or to go to Mexico, okay? Yeah, they're foreign countries, but this is my opinion. They're foreign countries light, meaning like so much of the history of Mexico and the United States are kind of intertwined to where some of the places don't feel like a foreign country. Now, there are places in Mexico that it really does feel different. Most of the places I have been in Mexico don't feel that different, okay? Canada, I've never been to Canada, so I don't know. But politically, socially, not crazy different, okay? There's differences for sure. Canada, from what I've heard, is a lot better place when it comes to politics. But it's not a stretch of the imagination to understand the day-to-day life of necessarily a Canadian. You pick up and come to Vietnam, however, it's different, right? There are some definite differences. You pick up and come to China, there are some definite differences on the surface. But what I'm talking about is digging down into the bedrock of these things, getting deep, living in a place, experiencing it for more than just a week vacation, although I think helps for sure. That's the crack that lets the light in, right? So take your trips. Like I said, get your passport, take some trips, get out there. But then I want to challenge some of you, like, do you work for a company who offers international assignments? If not, can you look for a company that offers that, right? Can you teach abroad? Can you go live in a foreign country for a few years, even if you end up coming back? I think this is a sure way to break down these racist thoughts that are in a lot of our heads, is once you live in a country that is not your own, once you see the way that a human being is no different from country to country at their core, then we have a place to start. We have a place to understand or to try to reach some sort of, if not understanding, as I said before, that's not necessarily the goal, but can we reach a place to where I'm going to understand that I'm not going to understand, and I'm okay with that. Does that make sense? That's the goal in all of this, guys. That's my goal with this channel. Everything that I'm about right now online is to push this narrative of we are one freaking species. We are the human race. We have to stop fighting about all this crap. It's so freaking stupid. It really is stupid. To think that there's a right or a wrong way to do something when it comes to, some of the stuff that we're talking about. Obviously, there's right and wrong. Like, you don't murder people. You don't murder people in broad daylight. You don't stomp on somebody's throat until they're dead as a cop, right? That's wrong, okay? There's definite black and white on some of these things, right or wrong. But what I'm getting at is, how one country decides to do something, how one race decides to do something, how one culture decides to do something. There's not necessarily a right or wrong. There's just different. And we should protect that because we're better for it, right? We are stronger because of our differences. We're stronger because of our diversity. New ideas are the lifeblood of the human race. We have to continue to foster this. We can't continue to put people down, to hold people down through laws, through oppression, through turning a blind eye to some of these issues. Because if not everyone has a voice, then we can't move the human race forward. The way I always think about this, I was watching a documentary. I don't even remember what it was, forgive me, but it was this man walking down this, it's like this train track. And it's in Bangladesh, I believe. And on both sides of this train track, out in the middle of, it looks like jungle country kind of setting. But there's this shanty town, all of these shacks made from just discarded wood and like tin roofs. And, they're all rusted and dirty. And, within just a few feet of this train track, there is just this huge neighborhood of slums basically built. And he's walking up and down, interviewing people that, that live there. And some people have lived there their entire life. Now, these trains go by, I think it was every 10 minutes. And everyone he talked to has lost somebody in their family to these trains, but they're too poor to move away. And it's literally, they could reach out of their hut. They could reach out of, the door. I use that term loosely. They can reach out the door and touch the track with their hand. It's within 2 or 3 feet from the entrance of their home is this high speed kind of, not like a bullet train, but still these trains are zipping by, right? And people have lived there their whole life. None of them are educated. Very few are educated. Life expectancy is really low. They suffer every day. Most of them make their living by going into these trash sites, these big landfills, and collecting any sort of material that could be recycled. Okay. Now, my thought as I was watching this is how many human voices are lost in that slum? Meaning, how many young people, how many new births, how many existing humans will never contribute, contribute to the larger conversation of pushing the human race forward. Maybe the person who is capable of curing cancer lives there right now, but they'll never have a shot. They'll never get educated. They will die on the train track, or they'll die from dysentery, or they'll die, at a young age, and they will never be able to harness their human potential to help push us forward. And that breaks my heart. That absolutely breaks my heart when I see the struggles of the inner cities in the United States, and I read the stories about how terrible some of these mostly minority urban schools are. Those kids are, let's be honest, guys, those kids will not have a voice. Statistically speaking, they will not contribute. In the United States, in the richest, most powerful country in the world, we are okay with letting some voices remain silent because of the color of their skin or because of the zip code that they happen to be born in. This is criminal. This is wrong. And the only way to fix it is for us to expand our mindset, is for us to demand that every school in the United States has the same access to funding, the same access to standards, the same quality teachers, the same safety, whatever you want to call it, right? We have to allow everyone in the United States, and guys, this could apply across the world, but I'm thinking of this as an American, okay? So as an American, we have to demand more from our government. Okay, so every police department across the United States has tanks and freaking body armor and all of these fancy weapons that the military has, right? I mean, the militarization of the police department is just insane over the last 20 years since 9/11. Um, so, but yet our schools are falling apart. Our teachers are paid nothing. I come from a family of teachers. My mom, my aunt, my cousins, quite a few of my family are teachers, and they are paid nothing. Their supplies come out of their own pocket. They work around the clock, right? And we pay them like nothing. And we wonder why some of our youth doesn't have a voice. But our cops have fancy machine guns, right? And all this other crap, okay? I think that's the debate right now. It's not that we're going to get rid of police officers. It's that we want it to be funded in a way that supports the growth of Americans, okay? So yeah, if we're just trying to turn it into a police state and a big giant prison, then sure, keep funding police officers at the same rate and defunding education in this example. But I don't think that I don't think that's what we want. Okay, I don't think any of us want that. So the reason that I wanted to kind of get into this subject today, and I don't know if I've done a very good job of it, but I just wanted to share my evolution and how my mind has changed from being raised as a very conservative, probably young racist in a sense, as a child based on my very narrow viewpoint of life, which came out of this very conservative town, to a few things that changed that for me. And thank God that it did, right? Thank God that I met my girlfriend who had me travel at a young age. Thank God for my friend Andre who asked me that question at the bar that night. Thank God for taking that job in Vietnam. And thank God for this opportunity that I now have in China, because it has continued to challenge my preconceived notions on the human race. And it has underscored for me the need now more than ever to get more voices heard, to give more access to people out there. We've got to stop holding people back. We've got to stop making sure that only rich white guys have a voice. We have to figure out a way to give everyone a voice, because the future of our race, and I'm talking human race here, the future of the human race depends on it. There are big problems we have to tackle, okay? Disease, climate change, obviously all the political stuff that we're seeing right now. There's huge problems that we need to solve. And if we're excluding quite a few voices, right? The majority of voices are ignored. We're doomed, guys. We're doomed. So that's what I wanted to share today. I encourage any and all of you to get out there, travel as much as you can. I know right now that seems kind of crazy with the whole COVID thing going on, but travel from your couch, okay? If you got Netflix, get on the documentary tab, okay? Stay away from all the hit movies, all the new releases, all the TV shows, all that. Get down to the documentaries. Start learning something about this world, okay? Get on your Kindle, get on your iPad, start downloading some books. Expand your mind, guys. There's great educational tools out there online. A lot of them are free or next to free, very cheap. I am shocked on some of the subscription teaching services like Skillshare, like Masterclass, like Mind Valley. Like, you can have your mind blown on things, not necessarily free, but for very cheap considering, right? When you weigh it against like a college education out there, like a semester at Harvard, you could pay for Mind Valley for the next 100 years, right? So anyways, just some suggestions, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I know it's kind of a rambling one today because I'm still sorting out how I feel about this. And I also feel a little unsure of how to share the subject in the right way. As I started, the beginning of this podcast is that I'm starting this from a position of privilege, and I realize that. And I'm not a professional commentator when it comes to politics or race relations or anything like that. So what I wanted to focus on today was just sharing my experience and some of the foundational moments in how my mind has shifted from being raised, very conservative kid with some racist undertones in his upbringing, to the place where I am now, where I'm not fully formed. Hopefully I'm never fully formed, but I feel that I've made a significant evolution on some of these subjects. And I wanted to share with you how I've had to go through that and what I've done to maybe apply some of these things to your life. So yeah, guys, as always, thank you so much for listening. We are going to get into a few questions now. Some of you guys have sent me some questions over Instagram, so I'm just going to pick a few because the podcast is already running kind of long. So yeah, let's get to the questions. All right, first question here is, what is a big change you noticed for your family and yourself when moving to Shanghai? So, all right, thank you for the question. You know, I think the biggest change for me moving to Shanghai was, I don't know, it's kind of hard to say because I traveled so much in Asia before, and I'd actually traveled to Shanghai before, years before. So it wasn't like a huge shock for me to come and, live in Asia. I'd done it before. So, I don't think that was like a shock for me. I know a lot of my friends who this was their first expat assignment. So in my company, just to back up a little bit, my company sent quite a few expats from other countries, mostly Western countries, to come to China for some expansion plans that we had for our company. And that was in 2015 when I came out. Quite a few of those people have left and gone back to their various countries. But in the beginning, some of them actually struggled quite a bit with some of the changes. But, for me, it wasn't really that big of a deal, quite honestly. So I think the biggest difference, the biggest thing, the two biggest things that I still kind of struggle with is some of the financial hardships here, meaning tax policy is different. Getting money in and out of the country is kind of a pain. It's more than a pain. It's expensive to live here, quite honestly, in Shanghai, especially with like rent. But then it's also the expense of like the exchange rate. So the American dollar versus the Chinese yuan, and moving stuff back and forth financially is kind of tough. And then the second thing is the internet. As dumb as that sounds, it's still frustrating that I just can't jump on any website that I want without like a VPN. And even then it's super slow. Upload speeds are terrible, stuff like that. So I think those are the two biggest differences for me personally. For the family, my kids have adapted really well. Sophia and Olivia actually really like it here. Sophia more so. I think she just really has come into her own here in China. She's 3 years older too, so that might have something to do with it. But they really like living here. I think the biggest change for them is the back and forth nature of being an expat. So, sometimes you've got a life here, sometimes you have a life in your home country. So I think that back and forth, that Children of Three Cultures is a really good book. I think it's called The Three Culture Kids or something like that. But it's kind of a study of expat kids to where they have a home culture, they have an expat culture, whatever country that they are visiting or living in, and then they create a third culture, which is the culture of being an expat, right? So you kind of develop an old expat culture. So there's your home culture, there's your country that you're living in's culture, whatever that foreign country might be, and then you create a third culture around being an expat. So I think while they've enjoyed that feeling of being like kind of a third culture kid, I do think it's an adjustment when they go back and forth. So yeah, cool. Good question. Thank you so much. All right, next question. Which camera are you using when you take those fabulous photos on Instagram? So first of all, thank you for the question. I primarily use Sony cameras. So I have a collection of different Sony mirrorless cameras. So if you're interested in specific models, I have the A7R4 and the A7 III. I have the A6600, and then I have some of the point-and-shoot cameras, the RX100 Mark VII, and the new ZV-1, which is kind of like a little vlogging camera. So I have quite a few Sony cameras. I know way too many, it's overkill, but it's my hobby, and I really enjoy it. So that's the camera brand that I use. And then the model just depends on kind of what I'm shooting or where I am. And then my stories. So there's my Instagram feed, primarily that's shot with Sony cameras. My Instagram stories are primarily shot on my iPhone 11. Yeah, my iPhone 11. iPhone 11 Pro Max. That's the phone that I use for most, I'm really stumbling here. That's the camera that I use for most of my stories. And the reason is because I try to document just, daily life quickly on the streets of China as I'm walking to or from work or whatever. Then, the best camera you have is the one that you always have on you, and that's always the one in my pocket, which is my iPhone. So my stories, mostly iPhone, if not 100% iPhone, and then my feed is almost 100% Sony cameras. All right, last question. Any advice to improve my photography skills? So thank you for the question. The person that asked this, I'm not going to mention names on these questions, guys, unless you explicitly tell me to, just because I don't know if, you want me to keep your question anonymous. But anyhow, the person who asked me this, you know who you are. Based on looking at your profile on Instagram, I don't think I need to give you any advice at all. Your pictures are fantastic. So congratulations there. I think advice in general around photography, I'm not a professional, guys, at all, not even close. There are a lot of people that I follow online to where, I just don't even know how they do what they do. So I think over the last 5 years, and really it's been about 4 years since I've taken photography somewhat seriously as a hobby, I've learned a lot. So the advice I would say is two things that I've done. You have to be a self-learner, okay? You have to dedicate the time to learn any sort of a craft, but we're just talking about photography right now. And that means right now, mostly it means get online, okay? I said this in the last episode, but YouTube is your friend. YouTube is probably one of the greatest inventions in human history. If you use it correctly, you can watch stupid cat videos and, dumb prank videos all day, but there is a wealth of knowledge on YouTube and it's all uploaded for free. So I would check that out. There's a lot of different channels who do like photography tutorials, editing tutorials, gear review, stuff like that. So I would start on YouTube because it's free. I've also looked into Skillshare and I've also looked into Masterclass on some of the photography things. I would say I've learned most on YouTube. So I would say stick with YouTube, learn. Second thing I would say is get out there and shoot. So, when I was beginning, I took my camera literally everywhere for those first 2 years when I was living in Chengdu. If I was off and I had a day off, I had my camera in my hand and I was snapping pictures every way I could. I was experimenting with the different lenses. I was experimenting with different editing techniques. And if you look back on my Instagram feed, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see that, the technique and editing style has changed drastically. And that's because I was just learning the tools, right? Like, when you're editing in Lightroom, you push this lever this way and you slide this little slider that way and you get different colors and different things. You're like, oh, okay, well, I don't really know what I'm going for. So I'm just going to experiment. I'm going to post some and see what kind of reactions I get. I'm going to see if I like that look over time. So sometimes when you edit a photo, you might think it looks really cool. And then you look at it a day or two or a week later and you're like, it's too much red, too much that, too much yellow, whatever. So, I've done that. I still do that. I still look at photos that I edit and I post them. And then, the next week I look at them like, oh man, I should have done this. I should have done that. So it's a continuing process. So I would say in the beginning, get on YouTube, watch tutorials until you fall asleep. That's what I did. Just watch them. Any free chance you get, just watch as many videos as you can to get your understanding of the principles and the foundations, adequate. And then you got to go out and actually do it, right? You got to go out and actually practice. So grab yourself a camera, hopefully a camera that has interchangeable lenses if you can afford that, just because I think that gives you the best photography principles so you understand, aperture and depth of field and stuff like that better when you are manipulating it yourself, when you've got it on manual mode and you're actually making changes in the camera. If you leave everything on auto or if you have a point and shoot camera, you just don't have as much, I would say, ability to manipulate the image as much. So I would say if you can get some sort of a camera with an interchangeable lens, set it in manual mode and just start experimenting. Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for the questions. All right, guys, so that will do it for today. So today's kind of a long episode. I apologize, and a lot of it was probably kind of rambling, so hopefully you enjoyed it, though. As always, if you want to see what else I'm up to, please check out the website. It is www.nomadicthrive.com, and that's kind of like the portal to anything and everything concerning me. You can also check out my Instagram, and my Instagram is @MichaelBMast, Michael B as in boy, Mast. And you can, check out the podcast on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. And that's about it, guys. I'm going to cut it for today. So thank you. And as always, we will talk next time.